Good morning and welcome to part 2 of our video cast from Henley Consulting, the specialist leader in the FPD management consulting industry. The second part in our piece on equipment opportunities into the display industry. And we're particularly aware of this since while opportunities for the equipment industry as a whole at a pretty weak point, with large fab investments on the whole being pushed further out after the glut of additional incremental spending that happened during COVID, we do think actually that there is some phoenix in this in terms of additional upside for new opportunities in niche applications that is quite exciting for new players entering from outside the display industry to come into the industry and compete. And hence this is a sort of 10-point plan on things that such general managers may want to think about when moving into the display industry. So as a big picture over the last 2 decades, this is the total capex spend in billions in effect, so up to 20 billion per year on new factories for making LCDs and OLEDs. And there were 2 really big growth periods, as you can see, from 2004 to 2011, and then the most recent Gen 10 and Flex OLED wave that started in 2016 through 2022, when capital spending was above $10 billion a year by the industry as a whole each year. And 2023 now is a low, weak point after a number of the LCD players did quite a lot of debottlenecking of factories during the COVID peak, meaning that there is now excess LCD capacity. And in the meantime, the Chinese marketplace has reduced its spending on the whole on televisions and smartphones by about a third, and the China market being 1/3 of the market in total. So the industry is not in a great shape as of 2023. And Ross Young and DSEC, that covers the equipment industry incredibly well, is showing that now with a forward-looking, pretty bleak equipment spending outlook over the next 3 years. News today that LGD was thinking about pushing out even further its Gen 10 OLED fab plans that was in the Korean press. But on the whole, my general outlook has been that technology innovation happens at the bottom of the cycle, and that will mean new opportunities in niche spaces for some players. And so that was the theme of the first half talk, and this one is more of a sort of managerial background on things to think about. So what we had talked about is the fact that actually the opportunities for now are in niche applications. So micro-LED and mini-LED related and their associated metrology markets are important. Mid to large size OLED based on Gen 8.7 half-cut fine metal mask, and ongoing work on inkjet printing at higher resolution for QD-OLEDs and the like are still market opportunities. And what's really fascinating at the moment is the number of players actually seeking to come out of LED test or binning and pick and place and the semiconductor industry into the micro-LED arena. And so many new players are coming into our space. There are indeed ongoing unmet needs in the display space, and we are fascinated by the change in industry structure with these new players emerging. So let us talk a little bit more about what's important for each of these players if you're coming new to the display marketplace. Well, firstly, any player has to understand much more than just their particular role in a single layer in the stack. So understanding all of the layers that go beneath you and above you, this is important for materials companies, but it's just as equally important for the equipment players in terms of really being able to understand how their tools play with people around them. The link to the specific material itself is really, really, really important in terms of processability, degradation and other issues related to that. So it's not surprising often that tool makers often reach out and form some sort of loose commercial relationship with the material suppliers and or have internal labs so that they can actually test the specific materials or inks themselves before deposition, since they really need to understand how the material gets applied. And what's perhaps less than obvious is that actually display makers are broadly most comfortable with CVD, PVD and lithography as sort of key hardcore processes. Now, across the range of other things, you will find the LTPS related steps are broadly understood across a broad range of players, but evaporated materials and the like is somewhat well held by a number of players, but then if you look at the availability of just generalist coaters that are not being used for photoresist, then that's actually often less available in a fab standing alone. And the more unusual the process is, I mean, the further you get away from standard CVD, PVD and litho, the more difficult it actually will be to find engineers willing to take risks or understand the application in real depth. Now, this is one of my favourites, which is just a general point that the display industry moves like a herd of gorillas. One guy moving, and it does tend to be SDC that takes the equipment risk and then establishes a new trend. But LGD is probably arguably the potential number two that could support a new tool here. Those two picking something up, proving it works and taking it forward is really important in terms of getting tool adoption. And so you might find as an equipment maker you ended up spending 80% of your effort on either getting LGD or SDC on board with your tool, and then others will come. And we're always very, very worried about anybody saying that their tool or process is LCD-like. LCD-like is a very dangerous thing to say, because fab managers on the whole are pretty conservative about adopting new technologies. And if you can imagine your factory that might have cost you 4 to 5 billion only works if every one of the tools performs absolutely perfectly, then you'll understand that the sort of risks that they really don't want to take. So really understanding in detail that you fit within the TACT profile with acceptable risks, with materials that are well understood, and how that works is pretty important. And so being like what something is done already is often not enough. This is now an old slide on the old OLED ecosystem, both materials and equipment, but my point is more general here, which is for a tool maker it's probably fairly helpful to reach out to the other materials players and then the display players and form an ecosystem of users and the materials that get consumed, so that you think about influencing display company behavior by being important to the industry around you, and that's probably a useful way to proceed. Now, what's worth saying is that your chances of selling a fundamentally new tool are really much, much, much higher if you can deliver fundamentally new functional value. So the tools that were involved, for example, in allowing the first Flex OLEDs to come to the table, those ones gave their proponents probably quite some negotiating leverage against SDC, because they fundamentally had to have the tools for the product to work. And so really that is the master plan. If you can come up with a piece of equipment that delivers new display functional value, then you're probably in a better situation than just being able to deliver something that has incrementally better product performance, yield, quality or cost. Those things are all of benefit to the display industry, but it's when you're really tipping the needle and allowing them to do something that's fundamentally new that it's important. And you really need to have a display expert help you understand the fundamental display economics of the application concerned. Now this one here is an old example, was based on Sharp rededicating a fab to oxide, and it was just thinking through the actual change in the economics, including the downtime of replacing tools and changing the process. But that's what I mean by understanding the economics of your display company. You really need to know what they would go through before you can start talking about cost of ownership drivers. And while those are important, it really would be helpful for you to have a display advisor to help you work out the critical elements of cost of ownership. And then it's worth saying that the display industry is actually 30 to 40 different players, and while 6 are the most important, and of that probably 3 or 4 the most important in terms of spending the most on capex, if you want to target your equipment to each of the players, then having a good understanding of their differential market strategies would probably be really important and helpful, since they are actually quite different in terms of where they want to take their technologies in future. And so then finally we wanted to recap with the most important trends and drivers of the equipment industry as it stands today. And I think that really segments into the 3 major buckets here. In microdisplay, then there are actually up to 5 or more different technologies competing within the AR/VR type space, where AMOLED on silicon, liquid crystal on silicon, micro LED, DLP and others are all competing. And actually there's quite some equipment innovation going on for wafer-to-wafer bonding techniques, and the role of, in fact, of the semiconductor industry here, trying to work on wafers of the same size to be able to offer these hybridized solutions for very high pixel count displays, monolithic displays. In the small to medium space, there's probably two major trends worth talking about beyond micro LED. The first one is Samsung SDC's value up agenda that they've been driving through equipment innovation over the past 5 years, and where higher brightness, as in MLP, whereas thinness and brightness and polarizer replacement, which is color filter on encapsulation, or OPD sensing to allow for full fingerprint sensing, are all actually being enabled by equipment. And some of these actually are bringing new specifications for some of the tools that need to be used, because the materials being applied are to the front of the TFE stack, and so you need to be a little bit more careful. The whole space on half Gen 8.7 fine metal mask and OLED is a real hot topic for now, and that extends across something I would consider to be a small to medium panel and into large panel. Then in the large panel space, there has been some weak news, especially today, on LGD pushing out their Gen 10, but the role of tandem stacks and half Gen 8.7 fine metal mask equipment is going to be fairly important. And then there will be a range of equipment opportunities for micro LED, both for tiled approaches, and eventually, of course, that market will transition to monolithic format. So these are the major drivers for the opportunities in equipment going forward, even though we're at the bottom of the cycle today. So that's our recap then of the key points we wanted to make to new players coming into the equipment industry. And we have been involved over quite some years now working with equipment players on a number of evaluations, and here is 11 of them. But we have worked with equipment players quite substantially, particularly on cost of ownership type calculations, on market assessments, on how specific tools actually compete with other incumbent technologies, which is always really important to understand, and helping people get towards defining specifications for new tools. And so the range of services actually, though, goes beyond just looking at the tool to opportunity and market entry assessment, competitive assessments, full NPV, factory cost target modelling, and M&A scanning. We've done a number of assignments for tool makers looking at which hot potatoes they probably might want to acquire. We've done a lot of work actually looking at revenue forecasting based on both the DSEC and Omdia data sets, and then work on customer strategy and partnering. So this is actually quite a broad suite of different service offerings we can offer to players in the equipment industry. Anyway, I hope you found that useful as a second part to this today. And while the market is particularly weak, we tend to say that new technologies are invented at the bottom of the cycle.